proximity alarm screamed for the 9th time in an hour, and Commander Vex already knew what it meant. Another world was dying. 74 cycles. That was how long the Xylo swarm had been carving its way through the galaxy. And in all that time, Vex had never once seen them slow down. He stood on the command deck of the Aurelian Vigil, watching the tactical display fill with red. Hundreds of Xylo bioships converging on the last offensive line above Threnna Prime. A world that, by tomorrow, would simply cease to exist. "Sir, the Threnna fleet is gone," said Lieutenant Kor, her voice flat with exhaustion. "All 41 vessels." Vex closed his eyes for half a second. 41 ships, thousands of crew, another name added to the long, silent list of civilizations the Council had failed to save. He had commanded fleets for over 200 cycles, had fought in 3 border wars and countless skirmishes, and none of it had prepared him for this. The Xylo weren't an army. They were an extinction event with a battle formation. They didn't negotiate, didn't retreat, didn't tire. They simply consumed resources, ships, worlds, and moved on to the next target, growing larger and stranger with every conquest. The Galactic Council had thrown everything at them. Combined fleets from a dozen species. Experimental weapons banned since the old wars. Sacrifice tactics that cost entire battle groups for a single-hour delay. Nothing worked. The Xylo simply adapted, absorbed, and returned stronger. "Commander," Kor said quietly, "Council command is hailing. Priority override." Vex opened the channel. High Counselor Amara Vess appeared, her face gray with the particular fatigue of someone who had spent the last 3 years watching her civilization bleed out in real time. "Vex, I need to know if the fleet can hold Threnna's evacuation corridor." "We can't hold anything, Counselor. We're falling back to the second line, and I don't think that will hold either." A long silence. Then Vess said something that made Vex go still. "We're sending the signal." "What signal?" "The one we swore we'd never use. Protocol Ember." Her eyes were hard, resigned. "We're contacting the Lost Colony." Vex frowned. He'd heard the old stories. Every officer had, whispering academy corridors like ghost tales. A species that had vanished from Council records nearly 1,000 cycles ago, after a single brutal contact incident that no one liked to discuss. Humanity, a name that had become a cautionary footnote, not a hope. Counselor, with respect, that's a myth. Even if they exist, they abandoned Council space a millennium ago. They won't answer. "Maybe not," Vess said, "but we're out of gods a prey to, Commander, so we're trying the devil instead." The transmission cut. Vex stared at the dark screen for a long moment, then turned back to the battle raging outside his viewport. Xylo ships tearing to the last offensive screen like paper. Threnna Prime's atmosphere already beginning to boil under orbital bombardment. He didn't believe in miracles. He had watched too many civilizations die to believe in anything anymore. But 3 days later, deep in uncharted space at the very edge of Council territory, a listening post recorded something that hadn't been heard in 1,000 cycles. A response. For words, transmitted in a language half the linguists on the receiving end couldn't even parse. "We are already coming." No one at Council Command understood what that meant. No fleet manifest arrived. No coordinates, no timeline, no promises. Just those 4 words, and then silence. Vex fleet kept falling back. World after world kept dying. And somewhere in the dark beyond the Council's furthest border, something ancient and forgotten had begun to move. When the Xylo finally broke through Vex's last offensive line, and his flagship's hull began venting atmosphere into the void, he thought he was watching the final minutes of his life, until the sensors picked up something impossible. "Contact!" Kor shouted over the chaos of the bridge, her voice cracking with disbelief. One vessel, bearing Commander, it just appeared. No warp signature, no jump flash, nothing. It's just there. Vex turned to the display in time to see a single ship materialize between his crippled fleet and the leading edge of the Xylo swarm. It was small compared to the Council's capital ships, barely a third the size of the Aurelian Vigil. But its shape was wrong in a way that made his instincts scream. Sharp angles, no visible weapon ports, no telltale energy signatures the sensors could categorize. It simply sat there, silent, in the path of an armada that had never once been stopped. "Identify it," Vex snapped. I can't, sir. It's not in any database. It's not. The Xylo, as if sensing an obstacle, redirected a full attack wing toward the newcomer. 60 bio ships, each one capable of cracking a cruiser's hull open in a single pass, converged on a lone vessel. It didn't move. Then it fired. Vex would spend the rest of his life trying to describe what he saw in that moment, and he would never quite manage it. There was no beam, no visible projectile, just a ripple in space, and then Xylo ships simply stopped existing. Not destroyed in the way Vex understood destruction, not explosions, not wreckage. Erased. 60 ships, gone in under 4 seconds, leaving nothing but drifting dust where a fleet had been. The bridge fell utterly silent. Sir, Kor whispered, more contacts. No. 5 more ships, same signature. 6 ships. 6 ships had appeared where the entire combined might of the Galactic Council had failed for 3 years. And they were not here to negotiate. The lead vessel, the one that had annihilated an entire attack wing without so much as a scratch, tore into the heart of the Xylo formation with a speed that made Vex's tactical computer throw up error messages, unable to process the maneuver. It didn't fight like anything Vex had studied. It didn't hold formation, didn't protect a flank, didn't retreat to regroup. It hunted. Behind him, static cracked across the comm array, and a voice came through, human clipped, utterly calm in a way that felt almost obscene given the carnage unfolding outside. Council Fleet, this is Commander Elena Torres, Terran Vessel Prometheus. Pull your ships back to minimum safe distance. You're in our way. Vex found his voice. Commander Torres, this is Fleet Commander Vex, Council 4th Battle Group. We welcome your assistance, but I need to understand what. Later, Commander, Torres cut in. Right now, get your people clear. This is about to get worse before it gets better. It didn't get worse. For the first time in 74 cycles, it got better. Vex watched, half in horror and half in something he hadn't felt in years, hope, as the 6 Terran ships shredded the Xylo attack force. The swarm, which had never in 3 years shown a single instinct toward self-preservation, which had thrown itself at every defense without hesitation or retreat, began to break formation. Ships peeled away from the battle. Not tactically, not strategically. They fled. The Xylo swarm, the unstoppable extinction engine that had erased a dozen civilizations, was running. Gods, Kor breathed, staring at the display. They're afraid. Vex said nothing. He was watching Prometheus carve a final, devastating arc through the retreating swarm, and he was thinking that the old stories about humanity, the ones dismissed as myth, as cautionary footnotes, had gotten one crucial detail wrong. They hadn't called them monsters because humanity was weak. They called them monsters because someone 1,000 cycles ago had seen exactly what Vex was seeing now, and had been terrified of it. The battle was over in under an hour, and as the dust of the Xylo swarm's shattered attack wings settled into silent orbit around Pharena Prime, Commander Vex realized that humanity's arrival had not ended his nightmare. It had only revealed a new one. He stood in the shuttle bay of the Aurelian Vigil, watching a sleek Terran transport dock with mechanical precision. High Counselor Vess had arrived aboard his ship an hour earlier, summoned the moment the battle turned, and now she stood beside him. Her expression a careful mask over what he suspected was overwhelming relief. The transport's ramp lowered. Commander Elena Torres stepped out first, mid-40s by human reckoning, dark hair pulled back, wearing a uniform Vex didn't recognize, but instinctively understood as military. She moved like someone who had commanded soldiers into hell more than once, and come back each time. Counselor Vess, Torres said, inclining her head with courtesy that felt almost ceremonial. Commander Vex, thank you for not shooting at us on the way in. Thank you for saving my fleet, Vex replied. 74 cycles, Commander. 74 cycles, and nothing we tried even slowed them down. Your ships destroyed 60 vessels in under 4 seconds. Something flickered across Torres's face. Not pride, Vex noted. Something closer to grim recognition. That wasn't the Xylo's real force. Commander, what you've been fighting for 3 years was a scouting swarm. The words landed like a physical blow. Vess went pale. A scouting force. That fleet erased 11 civilizations. And it was never meant to conquer anything, Torres said quietly. It was meant to map your defenses, test your response times, catalog your weapons and tactics. Everything you've thrown at them for 3 years, they've been recording, learning. The real invasion fleet, the one the swarm reports back to, hasn't even entered this sector yet. The shuttle bay fell into a silence, so complete that Vex could hear the distant hum of the ship's reactor core. "How do you know this?" Vess finally asked, her voice tight. Torres met her eyes without flinching. "Because we've fought the Xylo before, Counselor. A long time ago, in a part of the galaxy your Council star charts don't cover. We know exactly how they operate. We know their invasion pattern, because we survived it once already, barely." Vex felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "That's why you vanished from Council records 1,000 cycles ago. You weren't wiped out. You went into hiding." "We went to prepare," Torres said. "While your Council spent the last millennium building trade agreements and diplomatic charters, we spent it building fleets, weapons, doctrine, everything necessary to survive what's coming, because we knew eventually it would come here too." Vess drew herself up, the shock giving way to something sharper. "Then help us. Share this technology, this doctrine. Let the Council stand with you against a true invasion." Torres's expression didn't change, but there was something almost sorrowful in the way she exhaled before answering. "Counselor, I didn't come here today just to save your fleet. I came to deliver terms." "Terms," Vess repeated, the word landing like ice. "The main Xylo Armada will reach this sector within 6 months. When it arrives, it will not be a scouting force. It will be an extinction fleet, larger than anything your Council has ever faced, larger than anything that scouting swarm could prepare you for. Humanity is willing to defend this sector. We are willing to save every surviving Council world." Torres paused, and when she continued, her voice was iron wrapped in something that might have been regret. "But only if the Galactic Council surrenders full sovereignty to the Terran sphere. Complete authority. Military, political, absolute." The words hung in the recycled air of the shuttle bay like a blade. "You would use our extinction," Vess said slowly, "to conquer us." "I would use the only leverage that's ever worked on a species that's had 1,000 years to prepare and still wasted every warning we sent," Torres said, and for first time, something like anger cracked through her composure. "We are not your enemy, Counselor, but we are done watching people die because pride is more important to them than survival." She turned to leave, then paused at the ramp of her shuttle. "You have 6 months to decide whether you'd rather rule the wreckage of your civilization or survive as part of something bigger than it. I hope, for everyone's sake, you choose wisely." The ramp closed. The Terran transport disengaged from the Aurelian vigil and vanished into the dark, leaving Vex and Vess standing in silence, staring at the space where hope and horror had briefly occupied the same shape. 3 days after Commander Torres delivered humanity's ultimatum, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session, and Commander Vex, watching from the observation gallery, understood with sick certainty that Pride was about to make a decision survival could not undo. The Grand Chamber on Council Prime had not seen a session this heated in generations. Delegates from every surviving member species packed the tiered floor, their voices rising over each other in a dozen languages. Translators struggling to keep pace with the fury. They dare demand our sovereignty. Delegate Crix of the Vashtan Compact slammed a clawed hand against his podium. After 1,000 years of silence, they arrive and expect us to simply hand over everything our ancestors built. They also arrived and destroyed in 4 seconds what our combined fleets couldn't touch in 3 years, countered Delegate Oyu of the Farron Assembly, her voice quieter but no less firm. "I would remind this chamber that the alternative to accepting their terms is extinction. Ours. All of ours. Is it?" Crick shot back. "Or is that exactly what they want us to believe? A convenient story, delivered by a species with the ships to back up any threat they care to make. How do we know this true invasion isn't simply a fabrication to justify conquest?" High Counselor Vess raised a hand for silence, and slowly, reluctantly, the chamber quieted. She had aged visibly in the 3 days since Torres's departure, the weight of an impossible decision etched into every line of her face. "I have spoken with Commander Vex, who witnessed the Terran engagement firsthand," she said. "I have reviewed sensor data that our own scientists cannot explain, weapons technology beyond anything in Council archives. Whatever else is true about humanity's intentions, their capability is not in question. Capability is not the issue, Crick snapped. Sovereignty is. We did not survive the old wars, did not build this council from the ashes of 100 conflicts, only to hand it over to the first power that shows up with bigger guns. Murmurs of agreement rippled through segments of the chamber. Vex, watching from above, felt something twist in his gut. He understood the sentiment, understood it in his bones, the way any soldier who had spent his life defending council ideals would. But it also stood in that shuttle bay and heard the specific, grim certainty in Torres's voice. That wasn't the voice of a conqueror inventing threats. That was the voice of someone who had already buried people to a truth the council refused to believe. "Counselor Vess," he said quietly to the aide beside him, "may I address the chamber?" Minutes later, standing on the chamber floor under the weight of 1,000 skeptical eyes, Vex spoke the only truth he had. "I have fought the Xylo for 3 years. I have watched them consume worlds without hesitation, without mercy, without a single tactical error, in 3 years of engagement. And in 1 hour, 6 Terran ships did what our entire military could not. I do not know if humanity's ultimatum is fair. I do not know if their intentions are pure. But I know that the enemy we have been fighting fled from them, and the Xylo have never fled from anything." Silence, heavy and uncertain, settled over the chamber. But fear, it turned out, was not stronger than pride. Not yet. Not when extinction still felt, to the majority of the council, like an abstraction rather than an inevitability. The vote came 3 hours later. Sovereignty would not be surrendered. The council would prepare its own defenses, reinforced by whatever technology could be reverse engineered from Terran sensor data, and would face the coming invasion on its own terms. Delegate OU found Vex afterward in the corridor outside the chamber, her expression hollow. "They chose pride," she said simply. "They chose hope," Vex corrected, though he didn't believe his own words even as he said them. Whether that was the wrong kind of hope, we won't know until the Armada arrives. Far beyond Council space, unseen and unheard, a single Terran vessel received the Council's answer and relayed it back through channels that stretched into the dark. Commander Torres read the message twice, her jaw tight, and said nothing for a long moment. 6 months, she finally murmured to her first officer. "Let's hope they use them better than the last 1,000 years." Exactly 6 months later, to the hour, the sensors of every surviving Council world lit up with a single catastrophic warning, and Commander Vex, standing on a bridge of fleet that had spent half a year preparing for this moment, understood in an instant that none of it had been enough. The Xylo main armada did not arrive like the scouting swarm had. There was no gradual escalation, no probing attacks, no early warning beyond the moment the void itself seemed to tear open along a front spanning thousands of kilometers. Ship after ship after ship poured through, an armada so vast that the tactical display aboard the Aurelian Vigil, rebuilt and reinforced over 6 frantic months, simply stopped rendering individual contacts and switched to a density map instead, because there were too many targets to track one by one. "Gods," Kor whispered, staring at the numbers scrolling past. "Sir, that's not thousands. That's tens of thousands." Vex said nothing. He had spent 6 months helping design new defensive doctrines, integrating fragment of Terran sensor data the Council scientists had managed to decode, drilling crews on tactics that had never before been necessary. He had told himself, in his more hopeful moments, that it might be enough to hold the line until reinforcements could be organized. Looking at the storm of red now filling every screen on his bridge, he understood exactly how naive that hope had been. "All ships, defensive formation theta," he ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. "Signal Council Command. Tell them it's begun." It took less than 20 minutes for the first offensive line to collapse entirely. The new weapons the Council had developed, powerful by their own historical standards, revolutionary compared to anything used against the scouting swarm, barely scratched the Armada's leading edge. Ships that had taken years to build were annihilated in seconds. Entire battle groups, coordinated with 6 months of new doctrine, dissolved into debris fields before they could even complete their first firing pattern. Vex watched world after world's distress beacon flicker across the display and go dark. Threnna Prime, still recovering from the scouting swarm's earlier assault, fell within the first hour. The Vashton Compact's home system, defended by Delegate Crix's own fleet, the same delegate who had argued loudest against surrendering sovereignty, was overrun before the evacuation ships had even cleared the outer defense perimeter. "Commander," Kor said, her voice breaking, "we're being hailed by Council Command. It's Counselor Vess." Vess's face appeared on the display, and Vex barely recognized her. Whatever composure she had carried through 6 months of political maneuvering had shattered entirely. "Vex," she said, "the Council has voted emergency session, unanimous. We're sending a surrender signal to the Terran sphere. Full acceptance of Commander Torres's terms. No conditions, no negotiation." "Counselor, that's 6 months too late," Vex said, watching another cluster of friendly icons vanish from his tactical display. "Even if they answer immediately, can they possibly get here in time?" "I don't know," Vess admitted, and for the first time in the entire war, Vex heard genuine terror in her voice. Not the practiced gravity of a leader, but the raw fear of someone watching everything she had sworn protect burn. "I don't know if we have hours left, Commander, but it's the only chance we have left to try." The transmission cut. Vex turned back to the viewport in time to watch a Xylo strike group tear through what remained of his reserve fleet, and he found himself, in that moment, praying to whatever god still listened to the species his people had spent 1,000 years forgetting would choose, this time, to answer in time. Somewhere in the dark beyond Council space, the surrender signal raced outward at the speed of light, carried with the last, desperate hope of a dying civilization. And somewhere beyond that, a fleet that had been waiting 6 months for exactly this message began, at last, to move. As the last offensive ring around Council Prime buckled under the weight of an armada too vast to comprehend, and Commander Vex prepared to give the order that would mean the end of everything, space itself seemed to shudder, and hundreds of Terran warships tore into existence around the dying heart of the Galactic Council. There was no gradual arrival this time, no single vessel testing the waters. The Terran Sphere fleet emerged in full force, a wall of warships stretching further than Vex sensors could resolve, and at its head, unmistakable even amid hundreds of others, the Prometheus. All Council vessels. Torres's voice cut across every channel simultaneously, calm in a way that only came from absolute confidence. "Disengage and fall back. We have this." What followed was not a battle. It was an erasure. Vex watched, exhausted and disbelieving, as the Terran fleet did to main Xylo Armada, what 6 ships had once done to a scouting wing, except now, magnified 100-fold, systematic and merciless. Weapons Council science had no framework to explain tore through Xylo formations by the thousand. Ships that had annihilated entire Council battle groups in seconds found themselves outmatched, outmaneuvered, and finally, in scenes that would be replayed in Council archives for generations, in retreat. But the Terran fleet did not let them retreat. This was not rescue tempered by mercy. It was extermination, precise and total, and by the time the last Xylo vessel was destroyed 6 hours later, the armada that had nearly ended a dozen civilizations no longer existed at all. Council Prime survived. Barely. Scarred. Half its orbital infrastructure gone. Countless lives lost in those final desperate hours before humanity's arrival. But it survived, along with every other world that had managed to hold on until the Terran Sphere's fleet swept through the sector. 6 months later, Commander Vex stood in the same shuttle bay where he had first met Elena Torres, watching the formal transfer of Council authority to the Terran Sphere's newly established sector command. Vex stood beside him, older, quieter, the fire that had once defined her replaced by something more resigned. "Do you regret it?" Vex asked her, refusing the terms the first time. "Every day," Vex said. "But I don't know that choosing differently would have saved more lives in the end. Maybe pride was always going to cost us something. At least this way, we're still here to resent the price." Torres approached them then, her uniform bearing new insignia. Sector Governor. The Council's own translators rendered it, though the human term carried different weight. She inclined her head to both of them, the same careful courtesy from their first meeting. "For what it's worth, Counselor," Torres said, "I never wanted it to happen this way." "I believe you," Vess said. "That doesn't make it easier to accept." "No," Torres agreed. "It rarely does." Decades passed. The Galactic Council became a memory preserved in archives, absorbed into the vast administrative structure of the Terran sphere, which expanded to encompass 100 former member worlds and a dozen new ones besides. Under Terran authority, the endless border conflicts that had plagued Council space for 1,000 years quietly ceased. Trade flourished under standardized protection. No world, however small, was ever again left undefended against a threat like the Xylo. But history remembered humanity in fractured pieces. In some archives, they were recorded as saviors, the only civilization willing to make the impossible choices that guaranteed survival when every other power hesitated. In others, they were recorded as patient predators, a species that had watched the galaxy bleed for 3 years, waited until desperation made conquest look like salvation, and then simply took what they wanted, wrapped in the language of rescue. Commander Vex, in his final years, was often asked by young officers which version he believed. He never gave them a straight answer. Instead, he would tell them about a shuttle bay conversation a lifetime ago, about 6 ships that appeared out of nowhere and taught a swarm that had never known fear exactly what it felt like, and let them decide for themselves whether the galaxy's greatest savior and its most dangerous predator had ever really been two different things at all.